So when you think about FC Barcelona, the names that instantly jump out is, Messi, Cruyff, and I mean for the real old school guys, Kubala, maybe a Ronaldinho in between there, the giants, the guys who are undeniably still talked about. And the list is pretty long if you're Barcelona. But what about some of the other names that are more like a whisper in the history books? The quieter names who have stories that are interesting, if not compelling. And while their glory might have been fleeting, it came along at a very crucial time because behind any global franchise like Barcelona, there are always those figures who are club savers, but might not always get the same kind of glory as, the Messis. And their impact is undoubtedly huge and endless replay value some of their careers have if you look closely. And it's in that regard that we're going to do a bit of exploration, and we're going to be peeling back the curtain on a name not many are familiar with, that being Mariano Martin, a man who was affectionately known as La Furia del Área, or, the Fury of the penalty box. By the way, did you just like to peep the Spanish pronunciation? Like, been working on that, you know what I'm saying? 1 year straight Duolingo. Let's go. But anyway, we're going to be talking about the striking career really of someone who would have easily been one of history's most remembered forwards, in my opinion. We'll get to exactly why that is when we start talking about, his stats in a bit more depth. But he was a guy whose rise was meteoric and whose demise was depressingly meteoric as well. And it's just one of those stories that reminds you of how fragile the lives, and careers of footballers are, right? As if we didn't already need a reminder of that after the tragedy that we saw unfold with Diogo Jota and his brother. So, rest in peace to both of them as well. I guess we could say that this video as well is kind of a tribute to the players like them, the ones who we get robbed of, to be honest. And like I said, as we get into talking more about Mariano Martin, you understand why I have categorized him in that manner. Because you see, the story of Mariano Martin is one of a what if. It hangs over his career just because of the raw power and incredible goal-scoring instinct that we saw from him, and resilience as well that we will get into understanding. So, I did look at quite a few sources for this one, so give your boy some credit here for some research. Okay, Barca's official club website, their archives, which have some surprising gold nuggets in there, fan nostalgia pages, historical football forums, places where you can get some maybe more personal stories that you won't find in club accounts. And some of his former colleagues, just for a general feeling on the person that he was, the man that he was. And of course, you can't ignore things like Wikipedia and just other football historians and aggregators. So, a lot of work went into this. So I do hope that you will enjoy it. But enough of all of that. Let's go straight into it and let's unpack the story. From the beginning, Mariano Martin Alonso was born October 20, 1990 in Valencia. Now, obviously, we're not going to go too far back and look at, what he did growing up, where he went to high school or stuff like that. Did he even go to high school? I'm not sure. But he did grow up in rural Spain, early 20th century rural Spain. So it was tough upbringing and a lot of limited opportunities. So like a lot of people from those areas, he moved to Catalonia pretty early on in his life, just people going to the industrial centers within Spain looking for a better life. And that move ended up being the foundation of his later foundation, as he becomes really an adopted Catalan hero, even though he's originally from Castilla, in Valencia. It was in the neighborhoods of Catalonia, though, that he forged his skills as a footballer. He did so, of course, like many Barca players do, playing for local Catalonia clubs with an amateur team called Peñafont. So, not exactly the pristine surfaces of today, but more like the proving grounds. You know, the first real stage that he had before he could go professional. And the timing of it was incredible. You know, he did have some time playing for Santander, which was well regarded local club in Barca between 1936 and 1939. So, you know, around the middle of the Spanish Civil War. And just, you know, think about how a young guy finding his feet in football, surrounded by all that conflict and, you know, all that immense upheaval. It meant that, you know, his career couldn't really start until he was 20. He lost some developmental years to the war, and he wasn't playing in a stable league or structure like we have today. You know, he was playing in chaos. So just imagine how, despite all of that, he couldn't be held back. You know, rationing, fears, all those things that were going on back then. But despite all that, his ability still took him to the top. People noticed his speed. You know, he was apparently great in the air despite not being tall. And he had predatory instincts that so many clubs that were trying to rebuild after the conflict get interested in him. And, you know, that was just how good he was. That despite how things were back then, having football as an escape, he was able to rise to really the highest level for his region, which was FC Barcelona, a Barcelona team that were, of course, trying to rebuild. And they signed him in 1939, and almost immediately he started making waves, and the nickname started coming. La Furia dell'Area, the fury of the area. Cazagos, the goal poacher. So, you know, you kind of get an idea of what kind of a player he was, because these weren't just nicknames, they captured his essence. He had these prodigious qualities of a goal scorer, which, you know, are things like quickness over short distances, good ball control in tight spots, and bravery. You know, he wasn't scared to put his head where it would hurt. And his natural instinct for opportunities just always led him pouncing on rebounds. You know, he was always attentive to rebounds. And I mean, that's just something you don't see so much these days, because we all know how these days strikers are more focused on maybe building with their teammates and not so much on being the first one to get to a rebound when the goalkeeper saves a shot. So it does set him apart with his instincts. Opportunistic. That's what he was. Like he had a magnet pulling him to the ball whenever it was loose in the box. And he was quick and powerful. So it made him a lethal finisher. Just picture him, you know, prowling in the penalty area. I'm getting images of, like, you know, an earlier kind of version of a Romario or a Sergio Aguero, you know, that kind of a striker. Diminutive, but, you know, very instinctive and very quick in the penalty box with a good first touch and good close control. So, you know, that's the kind of player that Mariano Martin was. Sources say he combined all of those attributes with remarkable intelligence and finishing. Okay, so he wasn't just brute force. He had that football brain. He could anticipate moves, find pockets of space, and, you know, it was a mix of technical skill and relentless aggression in the box, which set him apart. He didn't chase aimlessly. He hunted meticulously. And it makes you wonder what that prodigious instinct meant from being just a good finisher, right? Because it's almost like something you just have, like a sixth sense, in my opinion, an uncanny ability to anticipate plays faster than anyone else, so you know where the rebound will fall. So like I said, it's not something you really see in the modern game. And if you could probably pick one word to describe Mariano Martin in Barcelona in his heyday, it was definitely explosive. Because when you look at the numbers during his first few years between 39 and 44, phenomenal. One of the most incredible scoring bursts in Barca's history. He racked up 128 goals in just 158 games. 0.82 goals per game. That's crazy, okay? We're talking about Lionel Messi levels of goals to games ratio here, right? And this guy was doing it back then, you know, when football was a lot tougher, when defenders could literally try and assassinate you on the pitch, and everyone would be like, "Oh, yeah, that was a good tackle. That was a good tackle." Really, it's incredible, especially if you're going to compare with modern football, right? Even with all the advantages they have today, sports science, tactics, but like 0.82, you'll be hard pressed to find many players who've done better than that. And he wasn't scoring occasionally, but he scored almost every time he played. He topped the team's scoring charts on 2 occasions, at least, until, unfortunately, his career was interrupted. But I have to say, that 1942-43 season, that was something else entirely. Truly iconic for him and for Barca. That year, he scored 30 or 32 goals in just 23 league matches. Crazy numbers, okay? And I mean, like, this is all due respect. Put Messi's 50 goal season aside, that just, it literally destroys almost any other La Liga goal scoring season that we've seen. And as you could imagine, it did win him the pichichi, which is, the award for the top scorer each season in La Liga. It's called the pichichi. And he was also Barcelona's first ever La Liga top scorer. Historical benchmark. Before him, didn't happen, and his record stood until a certain Cesar Rodriguez, who, well, that's a whole other goal machine who we are definitely going to talk about in a future episode of the Deep Dive. So if you're not subscribed already, go ahead and do that. If you're not following already on the podcast platforms, and, go ahead and do that and rate the podcast as well, please, and thank you. Now, where was I? Yeah, basically, Mariano Martin set the standard, and in that 43-44 season, he scored 42 goals. Think about that. Those goals had big consequences for Barca as well. Very important goals, because in 1942, he literally saved Barca from relegation. In a decisive playoff match against Real Murcia, the stakes couldn't have been high. But guess what he does? Dude went and scored either 4 or 5 goals. Sources, dodgy sources. It happened a long time ago, all right? Bear with me. But scoring 4 or 5 goals in a must-win match is absolutely ridiculous. Like, again, that's literally Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo type feats, right? These are the only other guys we've seen pull up in clutch moments with that many goals. He kept Barca in the top flight. Avoided what would have been a catastrophic relegation. Just think what Barca's history would have been like if they went down then. The financial hit, the loss of status. It could have changed a lot in Barca's history. It's one of those massive sliding doors moments probably in football history. Those goals weren't just about winning a match. They were about the club's survival at the top level. And just a week after that relegation escape act, he carried on by scoring 2 goals in a Copa del Rey final against Athletic Bilbao, sealing a 4-3 win. So escaping relegation and winning a cup with him scoring something like 5 or 6 goals. Okay, his brilliance directly led to Barcelona's success under immense pressure, and he was clearly a winner, not just a scorer. He was part of teams that collected their fair share of silverware. He won the Copa de la Generalissimo, Copa del Rey, in 1942, Spain's main cup competition. He was also part of 2 La Liga winning teams in 1944-45 and 47-48, even though his role was diminished by that latter one, but he still played a part contributing. And he also won many other cups as well in 1948, which was like the earliest version of the Spanish Supercopa back then. Yeah. There are also mentions of a Golden Cup in 1945 that he won. Maybe one of those, less prestigious or short-lived trophies that existed back then, but still nonetheless, significant, because when we end up looking at the fact that Barcelona has won 130 trophies in their existence, guess what? Those trophies that don't exist anymore, they count as well. Yeah? So another piece of silverware. It all adds up. His prolific scoring was linked to Barca lifting trophies in very difficult years, and he wasn't just padding stats. He was a catalyst for success, helping to solidify Barca as a major source when Spanish football was rebuilding and fiercely competitive. But there is a but, and it's one that I foreshadowed very heavily, right? I said kind of at the beginning that there's a but in this, and it's the reason why it had to be a deep dive, because there was something rather tragic that happened, something that transformed his meteoric rise by hitting a wall, a turning point. It happened on February 28th, 1944. Mariano Martin was just 25 years old, at the absolute peak of his powers, scoring almost at will in every game. And then during a friendly match, not even an official club game, he was playing for the Catalonia representative side. You remember how I said he kind of became a Catalan, hero, Catalan icon, despite being born in Valencia. And there he was representing, the Catalonia team, something we've seen a lot of Barcelona players do as well, right? It's more or less like a tradition with Barca players, the ones who are, Catalan by birth. He suffered, though, unfortunately, a devastating injury, a severe knee ligament tear. Just when you think it happened while he was playing, just a match which he didn't even have to play, and that he was still out there giving his all in that match, which he didn't even have to play. It just goes to show, it says a lot about his character and the type of, personality that he had. It shows his connection to Catalonia as well, and it highlights also just how fragile a footballer's career is, especially back in those days. Back then, medical science was not what it is now. A major knee injury in the 1940s was generally the end of your career. At the very least, you wouldn't come back being the same player, and pretty much just the end of it. Cruel irony as well when you consider that with his playing style, he was described as impetuous, relentlessly aggressive in the penalty area. A fearless, all-in approach. A very thing that made him the fury of the penalty box, La Furia del Área, is what led to him, unfortunately, picking up this career-altering injury, that intensity, that willingness to throw himself into challenges. It ironically contributed to the collision that caused this injury. His greatest strength turned to his vulnerability. And it's tough. It's tough. But then again, it's just a brutal reminder of how fine the margins are. Especially back then. The impact was, of course, lasting, as I've been hinting at since the start of this. If you've been paying attention, after the injury, he was never the same. Not just a dip in form, but a fundamental change in his game. Though he returned after rehabilitation, his mobility never recovered. His pace and sharpness were never the same. He simply never fully regained his previous explosive form. So the explosiveness, the quickness, that predatory sharpness, it was just all gone. Or at least severely diminished by, significant degrees. But it wasn't temporary. It was permanent. That's who he was now. And that brings us back to, the what if. How different could his story have been? Maybe even Barcelona's story. How different could Barca's story have been without his injury? Agonizing question. But if he continued scoring at the rate that he was, that 0.82 goals per game for another 5, 6, or 7 years, what record could he have held? Easily would have been Barca's top scorer until Lionel Messi came along, But just think of all the other trophies Barcelona could have won with all those goals that he was able to score. Maybe, it's Barca going to the inaugural Champions League and not Real Madrid. That's the nature of a what if, though, right? It's ultimately a what if. But as much as that injury may have ended his time at the top of the game, if we can put it that way, it didn't exactly end his career. So what exactly did the rest of his career look like? He didn't retire immediately. Barca kept him on until about 1948, which maybe shows some loyalty, recognition for what he'd done for them. And like I said, he was a beloved person who was basically considered Catalan, right? So, part of the club's identity in that way. But his impact clearly, though, was not the same as it was before. The numbers show it, right? In the last 3 seasons at Barca, from 44 to 48, he played 29 league games and scored just 14 main goals. 14 in 3 seasons and only 29 appearances. Compare that to how he was going the previous season, where, the season before that, when he had 32 goals from 23 matches. It's a shame. It's a shame. But even in that diminished state, he was part of 2 more La Liga winning teams for Barca, 44-45 and 47-48. And he also won that, Supercopa or Copa Duarte, I believe it was called back then. I'm sorry, you're going to have to be patient with me. I'm still learning how to pronounce some of these words, okay? So maybe the experience that he brought at the end of the day still brought something to Barca's team, even if his goals were not there, He was still an essential part of them winning. But eventually, his time at Barca did come to an end. And from there, he left and he went elsewhere, shorter spells at Gymnastic de Tarragona for 1948-49 season, scoring 8 goals in 18 games there, which, isn't too bad, but, it's not going to trouble the history books now, is it? And after Gymnastic, he had a stint at Zaragoza in 49-50, just 4 games, no goals though. And, it looks like what you'd expect from a player who, physically maybe couldn't get around the way that he could before and was now coming to the end of his career, kind of like you'd see from a retired great or a retiring great, like when those players go to those bottom feeder leagues that you've never heard of, right? Or I say bottom feeder. I should just say bottom level, right? It's not nice to say bottom. But there's also just a nice symmetry to how the playing days of Mariano Martin ended. You see, he retired in 1952 after returning to UE San Andrea, which is where he began his professional footballing career, back where he started it all before Barca. A real full circle moment, and he returned to his roots, away from the top flight pressure. Just at least feels fitting. He did as well, I should mention in all of this, get some caps for Spain. Not an awful lot, 3 times between 1942 and 46. And understandably as well, because remember, there's the whole, civil war that had been going on in Spain, and he was basically Catalan, and, a certain Generalissimo didn't take too kindly to people from that region and probably didn't want to see too many of them, wearing that, red and blue of the Spanish national team. But you do also kind of have to acknowledge that the injury also limited his time, and his impact on the national team. So that is basically it for his playing career. But because this is a deep dive, we're not just going to stop at his playing career, because at the end of the day, we also like to take a closer look at the man, the person, and what people had to say about him, and, what exactly happened with him when he was done with football. After football, it's often just as revealing when you look at what a person does after they're done with football. And it seems a crucial part as well for me for his legacy. Mariano Martin was widely respected for being humble and reserved. Not someone who chased the limelight, compared to modern stars especially, right? He preferred a much quieter life, So think about it like Jokic with his horses back, back where he's from, rather than, living in the States or like living in LA or something like that. So, very much that kind of personality that Mariano Martin had. After retiring, he did something very grounded. He opened a sporting goods store, Deportes Martin, in Barcelona with former teammates Benito Garcia. He chose a real dedication to just, running a store in a community, staying involved in sport, but in a down to earth way, helping young players and, the community around just get their football stuff. And that's, it's pretty nice, I think. Prove that he's just rooted, in his love, not just for his community, but also for the game. He stayed accessible and was helpful. There was a great anecdote I saw on one fan page where someone called him the Tiro Abuelo, the great uncle, and recalling how he ran a shop in the heart of Barca for several years after retiring. And it just paints this picture of a relatable, grounded man, not a distant legend, but part of the city's fabric. He didn't chase endorsements, he served the community he became a part of. He settled permanently in Cabrillo, which is a town in Catalonia, further cementing his bond, with this adopted Catalan identity. So he truly became Catalan in that regard. And he passed away there in September 1998, aged 78, after a long illness, and lived a long life marked by that sporting what if, of course, but defined by a quiet dignity. So then, when we pull all of this together, what's the enduring legacy? How should we remember Mariano Martin in the grand scheme of Barca history? That's the core question, at least before this deep dive. His legacy isn't really in flashy highlight reels, it's in the numbers, the crucial trophies, the deep respect from those who knew him and understood his impact. He's that quiet architect of Barca's golden dawn and a striker who quite literally saved Barca from potential disaster, relegation, laying a foundation for successes that came in years to come, which he even wouldn't have dreamed of or wouldn't have imagined. He was a rock that Barcelona needed in a turbulent time. And it really makes you think about quiet greatness versus celebrity greatness. Historians do speculate that his goal tally could have easily rivaled that of Di Stefano had it not been for the injury, and even Barca's own archives, of course, acknowledge the fact. And like I had said, literally in the modern game, you have to look at a Messi or a Cristiano to find someone who would have a goals to game ratio in La Liga that could compare to what he was able to achieve. Martin had a natural talent and a knack for being in the right place. His injury did rob football of a great legend, and it highlights just the scale of the loss that, Barca and football as a whole had when he went down with that injury. What more could he have done? We'll never know. But his legacy also includes being that historical benchmark, Barca's first ever Pichichi winner, setting the standard for goal-scoring excellence at the club, paving the way. And finally, his character, a legacy of loyalty, courage, dedication, and humility, a grounded figure who remained connected to his community. So, bringing it back to you who's listening, why should you care about a footballer from the 1940s, before probably your mom and dad were born? Maybe even your grandparents and your people. I know how young some of you are. But this story is about more than just football. It's about resilience against huge setbacks and how unpredictable life is. It's about the lasting impacts of those who build things quietly, without needing a spotlight. It shows that greatness isn't just about reaching a summit and staying there forever. It's also about the mark you leave, even when adversity cuts your journey short. His contribution was foundational, even if later generations built taller structures on it. Every great institution relies on people like Mariano Martin, whose talent and dedication, even truncated, laid that crucial groundwork. So the final thought for everyone who's listening. Mariano Martin's story makes you think about those unseen forces. Injury, resilience, quiet dedication, how they shape a legacy. And it pumps a bigger question as well. What other quiet architects are out there in history, in sports, in science, in art, maybe in your own workplace or your family? People whose full potential was maybe hinted at but never quite realized because of circumstances that they couldn't control, or whose contributions were absolutely vital but remain kind of understated. Perhaps you know someone like that, whose story deserves its own deep dive. Someone who preferred quiet contribution over loud recognition. What stands out most to you about Mariano Martin's powerful, poignant journey? And that is something to think about. And this was a deep dive. I thank you all for tuning in. Do let me know your thoughts in the comment section. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and follow and like and comment and whatnot. But I thank you all for tuning in. Do have a great day and Forza Barça.